Hi, everyone. Just hopping on here for a few comments before this week's episode. So this episode is with Rav Tzvi Davidson, and it's about Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber, who you'll hear much more about throughout the episode. But even though this kind of applies at the end, I'm putting it here in the beginning. Which is that the Haggadah of Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber was released a number of years ago, as you'll hear about in the episode. But just now, the commentary on Siddur, the Pirush on Tefillah, just went to print, and that has a lot of new things in there as well that were never printed before. It has Askamas, Rav Moshe Sternbruch, Rav Meir Mozuz, others, and I just wanted to mention that because we kind of mentioned here, but it is now available. So if anyone is interested in that, you can email rabbiferber@gmail.com, RABBIFERBER@gmail.com, which I'll put that email in the show's notes if you want to order the Haggadah or the Siddur. So again, you'll hear about Rabbi Ferber throughout the episode, but I did want to get on here and say that that was just printed, so you can check that out. Also, I wanted to mention, as always, that anyone interested in sponsoring an episode, and Baruch Hashem, I've had a number recently, so you can reach out to me, email me, nachri@seforimchatter.com, or you can, there's a PayPal link, and I should mention, it's $360 to sponsor an episode, but any amount to support the podcast is appreciated. There's a link through PayPal, and actually now just set up, the podcast is accepting Zelle, Chase QuickPay, seforimchatter@gmail.com, that email address, the standard email address. So you can do that as well. I'll put that in the show's notes as well if you're interested, as well as if you can subscribe and rate and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. I did want to just say that I've been mentioning before the podcast episodes recently a fair bit about Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but I don't think I mentioned yet that the podcast is also available on 24/6. So for those who are not familiar with 24/6, I will just say a little bit about them. 24/6 is kind of, call it Jewish Spotify kind of thing. And it's basically, there's no reason to have Spotify or Apple Music anymore. I got rid of my Spotify. I now have a subscription to 24/6. It's kind of the same subscription thing as Spotify, the regular family plan, $9.99, a duo plan, $14.99, family plan, $19.99. It's really the same thing. They have all the Jewish songs. It's great interface. There's offline listening you can download, and there's podcasts. There's a lot of podcasts in there. Seforim Chatter is on there, so please listen if you have 24/6, and if you don't have 24/6, check it out. There's music videos and other things. They also have their own devices. They actually just made a second one. They have the family player, which is basically it's a device, but it only has 24/6. It's their own branded device. It's only that. And they also just have the solo. They just printed this device. Actually, I think a lot of sleepaway camps even approved it. It only has music. There's no video capability on there, and it's like has offline listening. You can download for a month, maybe even longer, because of camp. So whatever, you can I imagine you can download Seforim Chatter podcast. Anyone wants to listen on there. So they have Seforim Chatter. They are 24/624six.app. I'll put a link in the shows if you're not familiar with it. Check it out. And you have to go online and sign in for a 7-day trial. You can just sign up, but there's a 7-day trial, and then you can download the app and listen through the app. But it really has, and there's different filters you can put on. It's very interesting. And if by the way, if you listen to this when you have Spotify and Apple Music, you really should check it out, because instead of having those, it's really, really useful. It's really a great service. So check it out, and Seforim Chatter is available on there. Just want to make that clear to listeners. And wherever you listen, enjoy this episode of the podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Seforim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Tzvi Davidson, who is a Rebbe in Yeshivas Kerem B'Yavne, and we'll be discussing Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber, who was the Rav in the West End of London, and he's Mechaber of many Seforim, Kerem Tzvi, and others. And so Rav Davidson is a great-grandson, is putting out some of his Seforim. They put out one sefer, they're working on other Seforim, so we're talking about Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber and the Seforim and all that. So thank you, Rav Davidson, for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, let's start off. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
I'm from London. Grew up in Hendon, London. Went to school there. When I was 18 years old, I finished school, came to Yeshivas Kerem B'Yavne, and I've been here ever since, going over 20 years. Baruch Hashem.
So I mentioned you're a great grandson. I think you'll clarify, how if I'm wrong or how exactly it is. But how did you become interested in even if you had this famous grandfather? How did you become interested in learning his farm, publishing his farm, that someone has time to redo and to publish his stuff?
That's a great question. It's a real Yad Hashem, this story. It wasn't something I was planning on doing. Not even sure I'm still planning on doing it, but I see HaKadosh Baruch Hu guiding me from day to day. It goes back around 6 years. Going back 20 years, I've been quoting Rav Ferber at my Shabbos table for all the years. Whenever we table, we've been quoting the Divrei Torah of Rav Ferber on the Parsha for many, many years. And about 7 years ago, my brother-in-law, Ariel, who lives in Yerushalayim, he was at us for Shabbos. And I quoted a Divrei Torah from Rav Ferber. And he said to me, "Who was Rav Ferber? Like, who is that?" He'd never heard of him. So I pulled off the shelf. I showed him the different Seforim, and he said, "Why does no one know about this? No one's ever heard. We've never heard of Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. We've never heard of the Kerem Tzvi." So I said, "Yeah, he's more well known in London. His farm do get around to other places, but he's not well known. It's not well published in as much in America. You can get this farm in England from Neyman's in Gateshead, but otherwise that's the only outlet that they sell this farm in." So he said to me, "You have to publish this farm. This is your mission. You're his great grandson. You have to take it." And I kind of agreed with him just to kind of please him, but I wasn't so interested in getting involved in it really then. I was focused on what I was doing in yeshiva. I have a son, Hananya Yeshaya, who at that time was 11 years old. And really, if we're meeting today, it's only in his merit, because Hananya, when he was 11, he took the suggestion of his uncle Ariel very seriously. And he said to me, "We have to do this. We have to do this. What can we do?" And he was asking me. He had his great hasmada, Baruch Hashem, and he's going to continue to channel it in his learning. And he encouraged me to get involved in this farm. But I said to him, "Chananya, you like this idea. This is your project. If I see you're taking it on, then I'll help you. But it's your project." So he said, "I'm 11 years old. What do you want me to do?" So I said, "Well, you can start writing up Divrei Torah." So he started. He started every week choosing one Divrei Torah from the Parsha and typing it up and making a Parsha page. His dream was to spread it out to schools throughout the country, go as far as our base medrash. But it was working. He was writing Divrei Torah up every week, and people were reading them and taking an interest. And he did 1 year, and he did a second year. And then we published. We took the Divrei Torah that he'd written, the ones on Sefer Devarim, and we published a little kuntras of Hananya's write-up of the Divrei Torah of Rav Ferber. And then he finished, we published it, we gave them out, we sold a few. I felt that we'd done our job. And then Chaya says, "Okay, we're ready for the next project. What are we doing next?" So then he combed through all the Seforim, because it was Ferber's Seforim. He wrote Pershim on certain Seforim in the Tanakh again and again and again. And so it's scattered, it's quite scattered throughout. So like when he writes on different Moedim, it's in different Seforim. When he writes about Rosh Hashanah, it's in many places. When he writes about Hanukkah, in many places. So Hananya, he went through all the Seforim and found all the sections where Rav Ferber speaks about Hanukkah, and he put them all together, and then we published on Hanukkah, and that was the second project. And then I felt, okay, we've done our job, Baruch Hashem. And then he said, "Okay, what's next? Now we're doing the Haggadah Shal Pesach." So that's how the Haggadah got started. And at the same time, I said to Hananya, like, you need to keep going. You can't give up your project of doing the weekly Parsha sheet. And so he started doing a weekly Parsha sheet, which Baruch Hashem is. And he's got tens and tens of people, very close to 100 people who receive it every week as an email. Any of your listeners are interested, then it's rabbiferber@gmail.com. They're welcome to sign up to his Hananya's weekly email. And every week he writes a Divrei Torah on the Parsha. He writes from the Siddur, from the commentary on the Siddur, which Be'ez Hashem we're publishing soon. And he did for the last 3 years. He's gone through all of Pirkei Avos. And just 2 weeks ago, he started on Eishes Chaim, the commentary on Eishes Chaim. So that's how we got into it. It was Hananya's brainchild. It was his encouragement. And Baruch Hashem, stage by stage, the small kundrasim came out, and eventually the Haggadah came out. If I want to just give credit, then as well as giving credit to Hananya, I want to give credit to Hebrew Books, because there's a website, Hebrew Books, and we didn't have Rav Ferber's Seforim on in a Word document, and it would have been a major challenge to make that work. The first couple of kundrasim that Hananya did, then he did that just typing everything up himself. And then we discovered that Rav Ferber's from actually someone called Chaim in Los Angeles put them up about 15 years ago. Kol hakavod to him, whoever he is out there. And they just every page photocopied. And we found someone who was able to run them through a program on the computer and turn it into a Word document. And then we hired someone to go through it and check that it was authentic to the original. And then we hired an editor, and Baruch Hashem, it just took off steam. So that's how I got into it. I've been into Rav Ferber's Torah for many years, but the publishing was in the merit of my son Hananya.
Very, very interesting. I mean, your son really pushed you to do this, and so yeah, Chaim's Hebrew Books. I think he runs Hebrew Books. Hebrew Books, so people can access it there. And you mentioned your email for anyone interested in the newsletter. So I'll put that in the show's notes as well. Like you said, it's rabbiferber@gmail. Okay, so I think we got a few minutes into the podcast, and people are still listening. Well, who is Tzvi Hirsch Ferber? They probably don't know who he was and his biography, his background. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about him and his biography, his background?
That's fascinating. So he was born in Tafresh Mem, which is going back 140 years. He was born. He grew up in Slobodka, in a town of Torah. His parents were with a family who invited Talmid Chachamim to their home. So he grew up as a young boy with Essen Tag, a daily. They had all the Bacharei Yeshiva who were coming in on a daily basis and eating at his house. So he grew up as a little boy with Torah running through his veins. And he had the great Rebbe, obviously the Rebbeim in Slobodka. He learned under of Itzel Blazer. He learned under of Tali Amsterdam. He was a Talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He didn't run under Yisrael Salanter directly, but the Talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, those were his Rebbeim. The rabbi of Slobodka, that's Moshe Dushinsky, Shud Be'er Moshe. He actually tells an amazing story about how he was appointed. When Rav Ferber tells a story that he was in Slobodka, the Rav of the town passed away, new rabbi of the town, and Rav Yitzchak Elchanan chose Rav Moshe Dushinsky to be the new Rav. And there was a debate about it because they wanted someone from the yeshiva, someone who was known to be a Talmud Chacham. And then Rav Ferber writes that he says Aaron Kotler told me, so he was referring to Rav Aaron Kotler, but that was one of his contemporaries. So he says Aaron Kotler told me that how Rav Yitzchak Elchanan chose Rav Moshe Dushinsky to be the Rebbe of the town. It's pretty amazing. He said that when Rav Moshe Dushinsky had to travel somewhere, and he just took a kuntrus with him to learn on the way, and it was a kuntrus of Agunas. And when he came back to the town, Rav Yitzchak Elchanan had an actual question of Aguna that he was working on. And Rav Moshe Dushinsky came in and he said to him, look at this question, it's Kvedat Mishkal, it's a great question, a very heavy question, a lot resting on my shoulders. And Rav Dushinsky was able just to give him shitas of the Gemara, the shitas of the Rishonim, the shitas of the Achronim, Hakol Davar, Davur Alafana, very clear, very well explained. And Rav Yitzchak Elchanan was so impressed that he said, this has to be the Rebbe of the town. And Rav Ferber tells that story from Rav Aaron Kotler, but pretty much firsthand. So he grew up in Slobodka, and then he got married. Maybe in a minute I'll tell more about his wife. That he got married in the town of Slobodka, and his father-in-law supported him for a number of years while he was continued to learn. He was appointed as a rabbi of a town, a small shtetl near Slobodka. He was the rabbi there for a number of years. Kolikol, it was the name of the town, and then eventually financial hardships came his way, and he relocated and he moved to England. It was a difficult challenge for him, and he spoke to different Gedolim. He spoke to the Briskerov, he spoke to the Baal HaLeshem. He had a very close connection with the Baal HaLeshem. So he went and he took their advice, and they advised him to go. And he went to England. And initially, when he first came to England, he was the founder of the Manchester Yeshiva, the founding Rosh Yeshiva of the Manchester Yeshiva in Manchester, which afterwards was taken over by Rav Sigal. And he was there for 3 years in Manchester, and then he moved down to London. And in London, he was the rabbi of the West End Synagogue in the Soho district, which today is not a Jewish neighborhood. And he had a lot of hardships. Hardships accompanied him throughout his life, from his young childhood and through every stage of his life. He had a lot of difficulties and challenges, which makes up a lot of his story. But Baruch Hashem, he had 5 children, and he was the rabbi of the town. He was very, very involved in the communal life. When he came to the town, he built a mikveh there, and he founded a Talmud Torah. He was involved in the community on a wide level. Like he spoke to the government to get permission for the Jewish children to get off Friday, because Friday in London and it goes into Shabbos, it goes into the night. So he was able to work on behalf of the community. He was very much instrumental in upkeeping the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva, which was the yeshiva in London, which at one point Rav Elia Lopian was the yeshiva there. And he was involved very much in writing. I mean, as what together with all of his community affairs, he took to the pen. That was his main vision, his taking his ideas, his Torah ideas onto pen. putting them onto paper. And he started writing all the way back in Europe. In 1909, he wrote his first sefer. He didn't publish it yet. He only published it later on, but he had it ready in 1909. That was his first sefer on Kerem Tzvi, on Bereshis. But he only published them afterwards when he came to England. He was very much obviously against reform, and that was a major part of his fight was against reform. You see that a lot in his writings. He founded that Agudas Yisrael branch in London, and he was sent to the Knesset Hagadola in Europe. He spoke there as the British representative of the Agudas Yisrael. Does that sum up his life? If I would add one more thing, I guess that he took an official liking to the British Museum, which he lived very nearby, and he would go there to the Oriental Room and he would do a lot of reading. And you see in his writings that he's very broad in his writings, that he's kol kulo Torah, but he brings in a lot of archaeology and he brings a lot of history and he brings in a lot of other readings that he'd read from the place there.
Fascinating, really, interesting person. So one thing before we get a little bit more to his family, you mentioned his wife, took a little bit before that. So you said he moved first to Manchester in the yeshiva, and then he ended up in London. So how was that? Who asked him to come to? Was it to Manchester that he went to in the yeshiva, and then why did he leave, and why did he go to London? Do you have a little bit more, any more details on that? What happened there?
So he initially came for Parnassa, and he was looking for whether Parnassa would be able to be stable. That was the best option to be able to bring out his family and support his family. After a couple of years, that didn't turn out to be a financially stable option. And that's what brought him down to London when he was looking for a new position that would help him financially to be able to support his family. That's really the initial factor that caused him.
Okay, so now you mentioned his family. I don't know if you have something more to say about his parents. You mentioned his wife and the rest of his family. If you have something more, a little bit more to add to that.
That's actually very fascinating. So, Shimon Yehuda and Chana Devaris, they raised their family in Slobodka, and he gave a lot of tremendous credit to them. He said there's a bracha that comes that someone who supports Talmid Chacham will be zocheh to have children who are Talmid Chachamim, and he said that was very much fulfilled in them, and he owes a lot of credit to them. Their graves were unfortunately ruined in the Holocaust. They died before the Holocaust, and their graves were ruined in the Holocaust, and he dedicates his Seforim to be an eternal momentum to them. Monument to them. And his oldest brother was Rabbi Eliezer Ferber. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He was appointed a rabbi of a town. He wrote many writings and unfortunately passed away very young at the age of 39. And they built a big ohel over his kever, and the Jews and the non-Jews alike would go and daven there. And some of the writings, not most of them unfortunately, but some of the writings that his brother wrote eventually got to his hand. Piece by piece, it wasn't all the Seforim together, but his writings are mainly Iyun in Choshen Mishpat and in other sugyas. And Rav Ferber, at the back of one of his Seforim, he put together two kuntrasim, which he called Divrei Eliezer. You can also find them on Hebrew books. Actually, that's where I found them myself, in Divrei Eliezer. And so he typed up those songs. That was his oldest brother. He had a sister called Rivka, who in World War I was taken by the Russians, and she never came back. He had a brother called Mordechai, who was married to the daughter of the Baal HaLeshem, the son-in-law of the Baal HaLeshem, so the uncle of the Rav Eliashiv. And that's going to be very instrumental for him getting married in a second. But so his brother was the son-in-law of the Baal HaLeshem, and he had a very close connection with the Baal HaLeshem. When the Baal HaLeshem passed away, then he wrote about his personal connection with him, and he writes about the times that he writes Yaldus Nizrakabi, he felt childish, and he would ask him very personal questions. He seemed to have a very close connection with the Baal HaLeshem. He had another couple of brothers, one who moved to America called Pesach, and he had a younger sister called Feiga Bela, who very interesting. I never knew what actually happened to her, but when you mentioned to me about doing this podcast, I decided to try and do a little more research. And fascinatingly, I saw a post that someone put out saying that they are the grandchild of this Feiga Bela, and they know that she had a younger brother called Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. Does anyone know anything about him? Who is he? Where is he? So I got in touch with the Dr. Lonenik, who's a doctor in America, and we made the connection, which was pretty amazing. Of really, Rav Ferber, you're going to hear, doesn't have any family. Each sibling, unfortunately, passed away young, was taken away by the Russians. Mordechai, the son-in-law of the Baal HaLeshem, he was taken to Auschwitz with his family, and Rav Ferber came to England. So he was one, and he was one who survived. And his sister was in Yerushalayim, Feiga Bela was Yerushalayim, and then eventually her family made their way to America. So that's about his siblings. Regarding his wife was a very, very special individual. In her merit, he wrote a Kuntres on Eishes Chaim. when she passed away. Going back, her father was a Talmud Chacham, but he was also a businessman. And she was offered many, many shidduchim because she was known to be a Talmud Chacham herself, and also the daughter of a wealthy individual. And so there were many people who were offering her a hand in marriage, but she was only looking for someone who was a big Talmud Chacham. And she turned down a lot of options. Eventually, she went to the Baal HaLeshem, and who gave her the Eitzah to marry Rav Ferber. She took his advice, and so that was the Baal HaLeshem's son-in-law's brother. And she was actually the stepdaughter of the Baal HaLeshem, the sibling. So they had the family connection there. She also was the granddaughter of Rav Yedid, who was the brother of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. So she was the great niece of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. So I'm sure that was something very momentous for Rav Ferber himself, who grew up in the world of the Musar movement. And they got married, and she came with him and supported him in London. She was very, very dedicated to the Jewish cause. Even when they moved to London, but they didn't really come to London. They remained in Lita in a way. They remained, all their values, their Torah values remained very much in the world of Lita. I don't think that Rav Ferber spoke English. He spoke in Yiddish. That was his community and the people he connected to. And as I mentioned, he had a hard time. Although his father-in-law supported him in the early years, the money dwindled. He made a Yisachar Zavuran relationship, and he gave his money that he inherited, that he received, to someone else to do business with him, who ran away with all the money. So he had a lot of financial hardships. My father used to tell me. My father tells me that when he was a boy, he used to go to visit Rav Ferber, and Rav Ferber used to say to him, my father's name is Simcha, Avi Mori Simcha. So he used to say, Reb Simcha, don't be a businessman. Don't be a businessman. He used to say that in English because he had obviously trauma from the world of business, and that was his English message to my father. And his wife really remained loyal and devoted by his side. And she passed away at a very young age. She was 50 years old, and the children weren't yet married. And he took that very, very hard. He really took that very hard. He writes actually a beautiful vort, which one can remember at a Levaya. The Gemara in Bracha says, Igra de hespeda diluye. The merit, the reward of a hesped is, so diluye means to draw up or pick up. So Rashi there comments, it means to pick up means the voice, meaning you cry, and then you bring the people to cry as part of the hesped. Ferber writes that if you take a kli and it drops on the floor, and many shards of that kli are all scattered around. So if it's a kli of pottery, you don't care. You just leave them, you sweep them up, you throw them away. But if it's a very precious kli, then every shard is valuable, and every shard has importance that you want to pass on. So when his wife passed away, he felt that you have to pick up. What does it mean to pick up? What's the reward of the hesped that you pick up? It's picking up who she was, what her values were, and handing them over to the next generation. And then he wrote a kuntras, Emek HaBacha, where he speaks about who she was, and he describes all of her values. And she seems to be phenomenal. She was always encouraging him to be learning Torah. She would sit in the room where he was learning just to get nachas from his learning. And then she would go afterwards to the shir, to hear the shir as he was giving it in shul. She would encourage her children to be learning Torah. She would encourage him to invite people over to the home. She would send all of her money to the yeshivas in Yerushalayim. She had a special affinity for the yeshivas of Yerushalayim. And he writes that Meta alai Rachel. So the Medrash says in Rus Rabbah, Meta alai Rachel, that although Yaakov had so many traumas throughout his whole life, he was able to remain strong because he still had his ship, and his ship was keeping him strong, keeping him all the way through. And that was able to navigate the waters of all the hardships. But as long as he had a ship, but once the ship fell apart, there was no more ship anymore, then Yaakov also fell apart. And that's what Rav Ferber writes about himself. He said that he had so many troubles, financial and other, but when he had a ship, he always had his wife. She was always keeping him strong. But once she left, then he really fell apart. So he turned to the Seforim. He turned to writing. And the writing gave him the Nacham. But I don't know if he ever really recovered. He never remarried. He always felt that was someone so special, so important in his life. Meta alai Rachel. That was regarding his wife. Regarding his children, he had 4 daughters. So do you want to add something, Nachim?
No, go ahead.
Sorry. So regarding his daughter, he had 4 daughters and 1 son. And he took a lot of nachas from his son. His son was named Eliezer after his oldest brother Eliezer, passed away young. Each of his children he loved dearly. He would write them all postcards constantly. Ohevetchem lenetzach, and then he would sign his name. Ohevetchem lenetzach. That was his children, and his son Eliezer. He was a Talmud Chacham. He was also followed his father's path to become a rabbi in London. He took a post as a position of a rabbi, and he also turned to writing. I'll tell you one amazing story. If we connect back to my son Hanania, that happened with Rabbi. They used to call him Rabbi Jack Ferber, Eliezer Yaakov. by Jack Ferber. And something pretty amazing that happened to him. I never was able to meet him, although we both lived in London at the same time. He sent me, for my bar mitzvah, he sent me a gift. He sent me a drasha. That was his gift for my bar mitzvah. He sent me a drasha written from the Seforim of Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. And I used it. That was the drasha that I used. I used the drasha that he wrote to me. And Baruch Hashem, I have his sefer. I don't think I ever looked at it. It's a sefer of quite obscure Eon sugyas. And fast forward many years, it was Hananya had already been writing his divrei Torah, the Zmirot Tzvi Parsha sheets for a couple of years, and now it was his bar mitzvah. And it was time for him to choose a drasha, what he was going to say for his drasha for the bar mitzvah parsha. And we were looking at different sugyas. It was ki teitze. We were looking at, there's many mitzvahs in there. We were looking at all the different mitzvahs to find a sugya for him to prepare for his drasha. And I said, you know what? Maybe there's something in Rabbi Eliezer Ferber. Maybe he has something we could find it. So I opened it up, and there in his sefer, he has a whole sugya on aseh dochelot aseh, which we actually learned from Parshas Ki Teitze. That's where we learned it from Tzitzis and Shatnez. So I took out the sefer and we learned his piece on aseh dochelot aseh. And I felt just sense of coming around, where he unfortunately wasn't zocher to descendants. He had one daughter who didn't marry. So there's no Ferbers in the world from Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber, because he had 4 daughters and one son, and she had one, and then the one son had one daughter who didn't have children. So there's no, his Torah didn't continue within his family, but his Seforim continued. But who reads the Seforim? Who's reading his Perush that he wrote during World War II on obscure Eon sugyas? Who's reading them? I don't think they're in print. And Baruch Hashem, Hananya gave a drasha. Going forward, my bar mitzvah is 30 years later. So going forward 30 years, Baruch Hashem, Hananya gave a drasha, quoting Rav Jack Ferber of Eliezer Yaakov Ferber. So the Torah is a kanoi to remain in the world. And if it doesn't come up in one generation, it comes up in the next generation. And very soon after that, about 5 weeks later, I was in England on behalf of Karen Biavin. I was in a place called Shrubbery Shul in Manchester, and I was speaking there at Shalosh Shudas. And I quoted Rav Ferber. I quoted Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. And this individual comes up to me at the end of the Torah, and he says to me, were you quoting Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov Ferber, the rabbi of Wandsworth Shul? And I said, no, I was actually quoting Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber, but I've never met someone who knew Rabbi Eliezer Ferber. I grew up in his shul. And then he said to me, from my bar mitzvah, he gave me his sefer, and he has a wonderful piece there on aseh dochelot aseh. And I was blown away. I was amazed. The Torah of Rav Ferber, even Rav Jack Ferber, Baruch Hashem, continued from generation to generation. And it was a real hashkacha protest to see how he wrote my parsha. We used his Torah for my son's parsha. And just 5 weeks later, it was all coming around. So Baruch Hashem, there was great zchuyos. So that was his son, Rav Ferber. So we had his parents, and we had his siblings, and we had his son, and it sums up his family.
And like you said, there was 4 daughters. So I guess one of those is your grandmother.
Yeah, my grandmother was Fegalea. She was the second daughter. And they had one child, my father, Avi Mori Simcha Davidson, who lived in England until just 7 years ago, and Baruch Hashem made Aliyah. So now the whole family are here in Eretz Yisrael.
Okay, so one more, before we talk a little bit more about his Seforim, one more biographical note, I guess, is his relationship with Rav Kook. Rav Kook was in London, was a Rav in London for Tkufa. So Rav Ferber had a connection, he had a shaykhus to Rav Kook, right?
Yeah, as you said, Rav Kook was in 1914. He was on his way to the what was supposed to be the first Knesset Gedolah. It was cancelled at the outbreak of World War I, and Rav Kook went to Switzerland, and then he moved on to London. The Machziki Adas Shul called him to be the Rav, which I think he appreciated very much, going back to an old-style Lita Shul. And I think he found a kindred spirit in Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. When they write about each other, there are letters back and forth, which are published in Mishpat Kohen and in Igrat Re'iyah, in Rav Kook's writings. He always writes, "Yedid nafshi," when he refers to Rav Tzvi Hirsch Ferber. So you see they had a great affinity for one another. Some of their letters with one another are just greetings, fun greetings, and some of them are halachic. There was obviously some sugya going on that Rav Ferber was relating to, because there's a letter that Rav Ferber writes to Rav Kook about, is there an issur of lotis godedu to open one basin when there's another basin which already exists in the town? And he was asking for a halachic referral from Rav Kook to say that it's forbidden. That's one letter he writes. He has another one of a very interesting question of the Chida, that Rav Ferber had an answer to a question about lava nitak la'aseh. Lava nitak la'aseh doesn't have malchus, but Rav Ferber asked, but really every love is a lava nitak la'aseh, because a lava nitak la'aseh always has tshuva. You can always do tshuva. So really every love is nitak la'aseh. So that was Rav Ferber had a very nice answer to that. He said that that every lava nitzak la'aseh, it's true, but we learn lava nitzak la'aseh. We learn the concept of malchus by a lav. We learn that from chasima by a behema, and there's tshuva there as well. So you see that the Torah is teaching you the concept of malchus in a halacha which has tshuva but doesn't take it into account. So he had that chiddush which he wanted to say, and he sent that to Rav Kook to see what Rav Kook thought about it. Rav Kook has a whole mahalach which he says it works according to Havamina, but not according to Maskana. A whole pilpul d'oraisa where they're going back and forth. So they had tshuvas back and forth, and so they were definitely close friends. Well, I'll just share with you one Devar which I like very much. Rav Ferber writes in his sefer that he heard from Yedid Nafshi Rav Kook, Hagon Rav Kook. He writes there a beautiful, beautiful pshat. It says that when Moshe was on his way back to Mitzrayim, Zipporah, and the baby was born, and they had to do the bris milah. They came to the Malon, and suddenly a snake came, let's say, according to the Medrash, and I was about to kill him. And Zipporah quickly took the tzor and she did the bris milah. And the Rav Ferber quotes Rav Kook asking, what was Moshe thinking? Like the Rashi says, quotes the Chazal, that he was involved in the Malon. He was getting the hotel ready, he was getting everything ready, getting the food ready. What was he thinking? Like there was a bris milah, there was a mitzvah asay doraisa to fulfill. And Zipporah came and did it, which is not considered lachatchila, because Hamal Yimol has to be someone who's chayv and milah, who does milah lachatchila. So why was Moshe not immediately doing the mitzvah? Moshe Gadol b'Torah, why wasn't he doing the mitzvah immediately? So Rav Kook said the most amazing insight. He said that really the debate that Moshe had was what's better, Zrizin Magdimin le-mitzvahs or Hidur mitzvah? Moshe Rabbeinu thought that Hidur mitzvah is better. And therefore he wasn't just getting involved in food, he was preparing the Suda. That's what it meant that he was involved in Malon Tchila. He was preparing the Suda for the guests to come, so that when they did the bris milah, there would be a big Suda, and now it would be a Hidur mitzvah, Merovam Hadras Melech. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to tell him that Nazrizim comes first. Even if it's not lachatchila, even if you don't have all the Hidurim, you don't have that, that's okay. The mitzvah comes, the first moment the mitzvah comes, and that's why it's Tzipora, even if it's not lachatchila. But nevertheless, the first opportunity you do it. And Rav Kook said that there are some people who are waiting for Mashiach to come. And they're waiting for the Geula to be perfect and everything to be fulfilled and everything to be in place. And only then they will come to Eretz Yisrael. And his message was that Zerizim comes first. When a mitzvah opportunity comes your way, you chap that opportunity. You don't wait for it to be muhudar. If the opportunity comes your way, you take that opportunity as it comes your way. So that's the Devar Torah that Rav Ferber used to quote in the name of Rav Kook, and it's written up in his Seforim and Pashas Shmos.
Beautiful, very, very nice. Okay, so now let's talk about his Seforim. His Seforim, you said Parshmais. I think that's what I mentioned. Karamat Tzvi, that's his Seforim al Torah. So I mean, you kind of alluded to some of his Torah, some different things, but talk about some of the Seforim that he published and some of the Seforim we have, and what you're redoing. You already mentioned what you redid already and what was published, but at least talk about his Seforim that he published.
So he was a great writer. He wrote prolifically. He started off already when he was in Europe, and there he wrote Kerem HaTzvi, which was on Bereshis. And then afterwards, that was in Vienna. And then afterwards in Poland, he published the second part. And then he wrote a very, very interesting sefer called Degel Machane Yehuda. This is already when he came to London. And we're talking about now 98 years ago. And Degel Machane Yehuda is a phenomenal sefer, which Rav Ferber believed that emet mi eretz titzmach, that the truth comes from the ground. And he used to learn archaeology, and he would read a lot about archaeology. And he would see the Torah coming through archaeology. And he has an amazing sefer where he aligns findings that came out through a different archaeological science and also science, where he finds different scientific ideas that have been developed in the last few years. And then he uses those ideas to show where it's in line with Torah. And I'll just share, from Degel Machane Yehuda, I'll just share one phenomenal idea with you. He writes that just in his time, they created the wireless. Obviously, he writes with the Yiddish letters. It's a Hebrew letters, but it's in Yiddish pronunciation. And he's discussing in the first Mamar there in Degel Machane Yehuda, he's discussing the Or HaGanuz. And he speaks, and Rav Ferber predicts that in the same way as the wireless was just created, and there's the ability to hear a sound from one side of the world to the other, he says that the day will come when they will be able to even see, and the visual from one side of the world to the other. And Rav Ferber writes, at that time, the Geula is coming closer. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is opening the gates of Chokhmah for the Mashiach to come for a higher understanding, to ease us into receiving the full light of the Or HaGanuz, which I just found phenomenal and so amazing that he was way ahead of his time, looking in science and understanding how that fits into Torah. and using it to explain different Mamrei Chazal. After that, he went on and he continued in Sefer Shmos, and that's when his wife passed away. So then he wrote a commentary on Eshes Chayil. He has all the way through Eshes Chayil, his commentary throughout, alluding to her and her greatness, but also bringing the different Mefarshim. And then he moved on to Vayikra. And then after Vayikra, he, as well as writing a commentary on the Sefer itself, Al Derech Hagadata and Limud, he also wrote Al Derech Pilpul, where this was a great, I guess, a hobby of his, but something which he took a great affinity to, where he would take Seforim and he would try and connect and align the Torah to the written Torah to the oral Torah. And this is something which was a particular hobby of his, and he was excellent at. Similar to the there's one sefer of Rabbi Abulafia who used to do such a thing, but also the Meshech Chochmah, where they're aligning the oral Torah to the written Torah. So he takes psukim and he brings out from the psukim where you see an allusion to. Can I give you an example? Just one that came up this week in Daf Yomi. There's one we were actually learning Nedarim and Yeshiva, and then it also came up in Daf Yomi. It's very interesting. So on the pasuk it says, "Ish ki yidor neder laHashem, or yisheva shavua lisar yisar nafsho, lo yechel devaro, kol yotze mepiv yaseh." So Rav Ferber points out that the word neder is repeated twice, neder, yidor neder, and the word shavua is repeated twice, yisheva shavua, and at the end it says, don't break your shavua. It says it twice, lo yechel devaro, negative, and then it says again the positive, kol yotze mepiv yaseh. Rav Ferber says, why is it all repeated twice? What's it alluding to? And then he says the most amazing insight on Nedarim Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, "Yesh neder betoch neder, ve'ein shavua betoch shavua." It was exactly a week ago in Daf Yomi we learned that. So what that means to say is, if a person says a double language of Nazir, if I eat, then he's chayav twice. He has to bring 2 korbanos. He has to be a Nazir for 30 days plus 30 days. But if a person says a shavua that he won't eat twice, then he only has to do once. So Rav Ferber says that halacha of yesh neder betoch neder ve'ein shavua betoch shavua is alluded to in the pasuk, because it says yidor neder, which is a double neder, and it says hishava shavua, which is a double shavua, and then it says, how do you respond to those? Lo yachel devaro. What does it mean, lo yachel devaro? So the way the Rav Ferber interprets it is, his word won't be chal, meaning the second shavua won't be chal, because ein shavua betoch shavua. As opposed to regarding the neder, kachol hayotze mipiv yaseh, everything that you said you have to do, that's a double neder. So that's an allusion where he was aligning the oral Torah with the written Torah. And that's in his Sefer Chakirei Halachos, which he has at the back of the Seforim, which are more Agadata oriented. He has also more Eon and Pilpul oriented ones. So that brings us about halfway from his Seforim. After that, he wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos. He actually wrote Pirkei Avos twice. He was a community rabbi, so he believed that a person has to not only learn the Seforim yourself, but to be involved in teaching the community. The famous Gemara in Bava Kama, which says, "Mande boy lemahavi chasida lekayem milei da'avos." So he was medayik that it doesn't say yalif to learn milei da'avos; it says yakayem, which means you have to fulfill them. Not just learning Pirkei Avos, you have to fulfill them. So he said that the only way you can do that is you sit with the community and you learn Pirkei Avos together. And every Shabbos he would sit with his community. I think his sons-in-law also did a similar thing, where they would learn Pirkei Avos together with their community on Shabbos afternoon. He wrote a commentary twice. He did the whole thing once, did the whole thing again. And that's published in the book on his commentary on Pirkei Avos, which came out in 2 editions, but now it's printed in 1 edition. Then he continued with Kerem Tzvi on Bamidbar and on Devarim. Something very interesting happened between Bamidbar and Devarim, which was World War II. In Bamidbar, that was just before World War II, and that was the last sefer that he published, 1938. He published that before World War II, and then he didn't publish for 10 years during the whole World War II. And then Devarim came out, and there's actually a very emotional introduction that he has to Sefer Devarim, which actually connects us back again to my son Chanaya. I can't get enough of mentioning him, discussing him. But Rav Ferber writes in his introduction to Devarim, he says that he wasn't sure if he should continue, because the Svarim that he used to write and that he used to send onto the world, who's he going to send them on to? Who's going to read them? Like in a sense that he felt like the world had come to an end. I don't know if he said this, but he didn't say this. But in a sense, just like at the Havdil, but Lot's daughters, more people. There's no one left. And in England, there weren't many people who appreciated the level of Torah that he was writing. Well, he wrote on a level which is enjoyable for Talmidei Chachamim, and it's also very enjoyable for Balabatim. Like for someone to read at the Shabbos table, it's relevant for everyone to be able to read. But at the same time, a lot of the people who were around him weren't on that level of learning. They weren't able to appreciate his Torah. So he debates, should I continue? Shouldn't I continue? Is there any point in continuing? And he wasn't sure if he should. But then amazingly, he decided that he would. And he writes that it's harsh to read, but he says, despite the fact that the Jewish people have been wiped off the earth and been burnt and gassed alive, he writes, Od yishvu zakenim v'na'arim chachmei lev yit'angu b'divrei Torah elu. He had the belief that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had said in Nevuah that Torah will continue. And he said, Torah Hashem lo tishakach mepi zarol. We're going to continue learning. And he davened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what he writes in his introduction, that yit'oraru rigshei kodesh b'kerev b'nei Yisrael lahashiv levavam la'avim shebashamayim. And he had that belief that it was going to continue. The Torah was going to continue. And even though the Gedolim, many Gedolim who read his Seforim were no longer with us, but the Torah would continue. And he published, it was actually already 1948 by the time he managed to publish it. But he continued and he wrote on Sefer Devarim. Why I mentioned that comes back to me personally. And you asked me right at the beginning, like why I got involved in publishing the Sefer. I want to mention just one moment that happened to me. And this was really a turning point in my world. I think I mentioned at the beginning that I saw it more as my son's project than my project. But a turning point for me when it became my project, as well as my son's, was I was standing in the yeshiva, and the Kuntras on Chanukah had just come out that we published. And I gave a copy to one of my rebbeim, Rav Moshe Stab, who was a rebbe here in the yeshiva. And he asked me about the background. Who was he? What are you doing? And I told him a bit of the background. And Rav Stab has a way of like pinching your shoulder when he speaks to you and like holding you very, very tightly, especially when he wants to give a message, like a message he wants to penetrate into your neshama. So he grabbed, and he's very tall as well, and not so tall. So he grabbed me from above, and he was holding my shoulder very tightly, and he said to me, "Ata kolet ma korekan," which freely translates as, "Can you fathom what's going on here? Do you understand what's happening?" And I wasn't sure what he was referring to yet. He said, there was a Jew who was sitting in his little hovel in Europe, who was writing these Divrei Torah, who had no idea if anyone would ever read them. And here is a boy who's 11 or 12 years old at that time, who's learning his Torah and publishing his Torah and excited by his Torah. Not only interested in it, but feels a personal connection. And he said, do you see the Hashem coming around me door? You see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes out one generation, but then returns and brings Torah back with a new generation? And when Rav Stav said that to me, instead of feeling that the publishing of the Seforim was somewhat of a burden, I felt like it was a mission. I felt like I'd been sent on a shlichus. The Rav Ferber's Torah had reached a certain point, and now it was the time for renewal. It was time for that Torah. The Torah never ends. The Torah is eternal. And that they gave me that sense of mission and vision that I had to be involved in it. So Rav Ferber actually, after I saw, writes the same thing in his introduction to Devarim, but that was a moment for me where I felt it very, very personal. So that's regarding his Sefer Devarim. One Sefer that he's very, very well known for in the learned world is the Sefer that it's more of a kuntras called Berur Halacha. There was a phenomena which at that time was common, unfortunately still common, which is that people would get married civilly but wouldn't get married halachically. And that was something which he saw was happening, and he was upset by it. And he wanted to give a response to it. So he wrote a kuntras. What is the halachic status of these people? There's a halachic concept, which is that a person who gets married, even if they didn't get married halachically, we presume that they have in mind to get married just by being together. And that's a question. If someone's not religious, do they have that concept in mind? Do they care about znus? He said that every couple is a different story. Some couples don't care about halacha at all. Some do care about halacha. They want to pressure their parents. Some it just costs too much money, but they wish they would get married. So every couple is a different story. And he writes a lengthy kuntras where he relates to this topic. And he sent it to the Gedolim in Europe. And he said that he personally thinks l'chumra, that they should have a get l'chumra. But he didn't want to paskin that until he had the backing, or he wanted to hear the opinions of the Gedolim. So he sent his letter to many, many Gedolim throughout Europe. And we're talking now pre-war Europe. I'm going back a little step. This is 1937. And this kuntras was sent, and you find it in many, Zakana Aharon of Vulcan, he publishes a tshuva to Rav Ferber in his Seforim. Rav Yav Moshe Charla in Yerushalayim, in Beit Zvul, he publishes a tshuva. And two very moving tshuvas that are also weren't published, but were later on received, was one tshuva from the Dvar Avram, Rav Kahana Shapira, and that tshuva was written in the ghetto, which is phenomenal to envision. And he wasn't able to send it. It was written but not sent. And after the war, it was found. And Rav Ferber publishes it in the back. He publishes the Beru Halacha, and then afterwards he brings the other ones that are in other Seforim. He doesn't quote there. He says you can look there, you can see them there. But the Dvar Avrahams, he brings in his own sefer, and also Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski. Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski also replied to him, and it never made it because of the war, but it got to him miraculously. The tshuva got to him, and in the end of Sefer Vayikra, it's printed up, the Be'er Halacha, together with the tshuvas that he wrote of those, which is pretty phenomenal. Just before COVID, then we had the source of having Rav Hershel Shechter and Karen Biavner for Shabbos, and I'd heard him quoting Rav Ferber, and I had no idea how. I had no idea how he knew of Rav Ferber, but I had come up to him to Shabbos davening, and I said to him that we're republishing. At that point, we had the Haggadah Shal Pesach. It was already the printers that hadn't come back yet, and I had the kind of the paper copy. And I went to Rav Shechter and I said, Rav Shechter, I know you knew Rav Ferber. How did you know him? Like, what's the connection? And he said to me that he didn't know him initially, but there was a precious Jew called Peter Faber who lives in LA, Los Angeles, who sent him a copy of the Sefer, and he's been learning it ever since, and he likes to quote it. He has a special affinity for the Siddur, is what he particularly likes, and he quotes that many times in his Shirim on his Siddur. And he said that he's found favor in those Svarim have found favor in his eyes ever since. And then he said, and I mentioned to him that we're doing this, the Haggadah, I would be happy if you would read over it and maybe give a haskama. And then he said to me, but please make sure you publish the Be'er Halacha. So I said, how did you know the Be'er Halacha? He said, not only do I know the Be'er Halacha, but I've seen it written in the Tshuvas of other Gedolim. That's how I first ever heard of Rav Ferber, from seeing the Tshuvas of the other Gedolim. And then that's how he became well known amongst the Gedolim. One or two more from just to he wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos, and afterwards he wrote a commentary on the Siddur. And that's actually our next project that we're working on, is the Siddur. After that, he wrote another version of Kerem HaTorah. He started the Torah again. He done all of this Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And then he started from the beginning, and he started a new sefer called Kerem HaTorah, which he managed to get through all of Bereshis, but it didn't continue after Bereshis. He called it Kerem because the way that a Kerem is written, the way a Kerem is planted, a vineyard is planted, is that everything has its place and it's all very musudar. He gives a number of reasons why, but that's one of the reasons he gives, that everything is very musudar. And then finally, towards the end of his life, he printed the Haggadah Shal Pesach, which was our first sefer that we worked on. I'll be happy to share more about that with you in a minute. The Haggadah Shal Pesach, and then one very, very moving sefer, which I just want to mention as we're coming to the end of his Seforim, is when he was 80 years old. He lived till the age of 87. When he was 80 years old, he had a heart attack, and for 5 weeks he was in between life and death. He was on his deathbed, and they had one operation, and they weren't sure, and they had another operation, and he wasn't sure if he was going to survive. And Baruch Hashem, he did survive. He lived for another 7 years, but he wasn't sure how long he was going to live for at that point. And when he recovered, then the doctors recommended to him that he go to the seaside and he only take a break now. He totally relax in order to recover. And he said, I understand what the doctors want. They want me to return to myself. He said, myself is the base medrash. Myself is my Seforim. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me more life, the opportunity to live for longer, I have to invest myself. And what he did then was, he went and he added to all of his Seforim, all the different Seforim that since they were published, he'd had more ideas and additional thoughts. He went back and he added to Bereshis, and he added to the Siddur, and he added to the Haggadah, and he added many, many, many more insights and others from that he hadn't printed yet. He said that he felt ga'aguim gedolim. He felt this great sense to learn Torah. And he quoted there in the introduction to Ziv Chei Toda, he named the book Ziv Chei Toda, a korban of Toda. And he quoted at the Medrash Tanchuma, which is it's very moving. The Medrash Tanchuma says that a person who brings a korban Toda, if they can bring a par, they bring a par. If they can bring an aisle. If they can only bring a yona, a bird, they bring a bird. If they can't bring those, they bring a sodas, a mincha offering. Whatever they can bring, they bring it. If they can't even bring that, then at least bring words. And Rav Ferber said, I'm going to bring words. It was 50 years after he came to England. He came to England at age 30, and he had his heart attack when he was age 50 years later. And that's when he published his final sefer. And that gave him a great sense of, I guess, having justified what he'd been through. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him an extension of life. He's going to use it to publish another sefer. And he published that one more sefer, and Baruch Hashem, he lived for another number of years, even after that. But that was his final work, and then he continued learning Torah, but he became weaker at the end of his life. So that's an overview of some of this Seforim. Maybe we'll get into more detail in a minute about one or two of them.
Okay, yes, he has some more. There's an Esther, and there's some others as well. Okay, so I know throughout we've discussed, you've given a lot of nice examples and some sampling of some of his Torah, but was there any specific style that he had on his farm? You can anything specific, I guess, not the halachically, but any style of his Torah that you see?
That's a great question. It's hard to pinpoint him on one particular style because he's very broad. when he writes halachic tshuvas, he writes in one way, and he has the chakiri halachos, which are very much eon orientated, very, very enjoyable lamdanas, which you can really follow him, very, very clearly presented with a beautiful, lucid Hebrew. And when he writes on the Agarita, then he writes very crisply, very clearly. He has different styles of Torah. One style that I mentioned already, and we gave one example of, is the idea that he often found ways to connect from the psukim all the way to the Midrashei Chazal. That was one style of learning which was very, very clear. I'll just give one more example. We gave the example of the Ned already, but if I can give one example from the Haggadah Shel Pesach, he has a beautiful, beautiful insight. In the Haggadah Shel Pesach, and this is printed in the new edition as well, the Haggadah Shel Pesach, it says that mitzvah aleinu lesaper, v'afilu kulanu chachamim, even if everyone is wise and everyone is a sage, there's still a mitzvah to tell. And he says, where do we see that in the Torah? There's nothing. Rav Ferber, like he repeated again and again, there was nothing that's not alluded to in Torah. Every idea that you could think of, there's an allusion to in the Torah. So where do we see in the Torah that there's an allusion to the idea that even if someone is a Talmud Chacham, they're still, and they know all the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, there's still a mitzvah. So he brings it mefurish from Parshas Yisro. In Parshas Yisro, it says that Yisro heard Kol Asher Ava, everything that happened to the Jewish people. So Yisro is a Talmud Chacham who knows the entire story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So does he have the obligation to hear it again? So it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu met Yisro, v'yasaper Moshe lechotno et kol hatalaot l'shavalav. You see that Moshe repeated all the things that happened. So you see from there an allusion to the mitzvah, what that which says in Haggadah Shel Pesach, that even if you know the entire story, there's still a mitzvah to repeat and go over them again. That's my first. That's one style of his Torah, that he would connect oral Torah to written Torah. Another style of his Torah, which he was very fond of, was Gematria and Ramazim. At the end of many parshios, he brings Gematrias. He says that he's going in the path of the Tur, the Balaturim, and the Shach on the Torah. And he wrote that on Bereshis and Devarim. And he brings what he has a speciality, you could say, in. What he brings is he brings the Midrashei Chazal on a particular pasuk. And he shows you how, in that very pasuk, the Midrash Chazal is alluded to. And it's pretty phenomenal. I'll give you one example. It says, "V'yipol al tzavarei Binyamin achiv v'yev." And Chazal tell us, Rashi brings it, that he was crying on the Beis HaMikdash. So Rav Ferber worked out that the gematria of tzavarei Binyamin is Hamikdash. The Hamikdash. That's an example of something he would do. And if we're going to Chananya, that's which is a personal hobby. in my son Chanya's free time, he likes to go through all Rashi on the Parsha, and he looks for whenever Rashi quotes a Midrash Chazal. And then Chananya looks in the parsha to see if there's an allusion to it. So Chananya, he started filling on his parsha sheet of the Zmirot Tzvi, as well as whenever Rav Ferber has a gematria, then Chananya brings Rav Ferber's gematria. Whenever he doesn't have a gematria, then Chananya brings his own. So one of the ones that Chananya recently did was V'yishma et hakol, and then Chananya worked out the gematria is exactly what Rashi says. Hu hakol shnidaberi mo b'sinai. So that's an affinity that both Rav Ferber had, and Chananya is following in his path of finding allusions to the Midrash Chazal in the pasuk itself. So that's a second example of his style. Another example of his style is that he brings al derech halatza, which I guess you could say in a joking manner. I don't know how you would translate that exactly, but in a joking manner, where he finds like allusions to human frailties and encouragement, I guess you could say, of different things that need chizuk. In his introduction to the Siddur, he has a nice one of those. In his introduction to the Siddur, he writes, why was it in the Beis HaMikdash that it says they were omdim tzfufim? When they would stand up, they were squashed together. But when they would bow down, mishtachavim, then they had plenty of space. So Rav Ferber asks, why did he only make the miracle when they were bowing down? They could make the miracle even when they're standing up. So he said that he's seen people who walk around during davening. Tfilas haderech. They're walking around while they're davening. Tfilas haderech. And he said that the proper way, the proper decorum in shul, is that everyone stays in their place from the beginning all the way to the end. So he says, al derech that maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu made them tzfufim in the Beis HaMikdash, so that they would stay in their place, remain in their place while they were davening. That's an example of something he would do al derech halatza. His standard style, though, really was where he would take drushes from the pasuk. He would be medayik if it was one part of the pasuk was in singular, v'yishma, and the continuation of the pasuk was yishma'u, and then he'll ask why did it start in singular and then it goes on to plural. That's a classic Rav Ferber type of a drusha. Or he'll take, as I said, Midrashei Chazal. I'll give you one beautiful example. It says in the beginning of Parshas Devarim, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu is alluding to different things that happened along the path, he refers to a place called Chatzerot. And Rashi tells us Chatzerot was the machloket of Korach. So Rav Ferber asks, why was the Korach story called Chatzerot? What's Chatzerot about it? So he quotes a Hasidic Rebbe who says a beautiful idea that Shlomo HaMelech, which really was the first time when all of Yisrael were united when after they entered Eretz Yisrael, Shlomo HaMelech brought all the people together and made a takana of Erev Chatzeres. Now, what is Erev Chatzeres? It's where all the people join together over a piece of bread and they're all considered a one home, united, unity. And he was very much into unity. Everyone was coming together. It was a unity of Am Yisrael. So Shlomo HaMelech was aiming for unity. Shlomo HaMelech was aiming for unity, but Korach was not. Korach, it says, Vikach Korach, the Targum translates, Ve'it Paleg. He was looking for division. So when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to refer to Korach, he said Chatzerot, in plural. Why? Because Shlomo, with the Erev Tchumen, Erev Chatzeres, was bringing all the people together into being unity. That was Shlomo HaMelech was doing. But Korach was making Chatzerot, Chatzer. Everyone was divided. That's an example of his style, where he'll take from the word of the pasuk and he'll show you a Midrash Chazal. He'll take nuances in the psukim. He's very loyal to the text. And often he would also say, Lichvod bar mitzvah. Like he'll take a beautiful idea, a beautiful mahalach, and because he was a rabbi of a shul, then he would take some drasha that he was saying, and he would say, I said this idea in a bar mitzvah, and then he gives you the relevance for the bar mitzvah boy, and he shows how to bring it down and make it very grounded and down to earth.
Okay, so that's a sampling of his Torah, depending on what we said throughout. Okay, so one other thing that you kind of have mentioned here and there, but discuss specifically his memoirs. There's a lot of these memoirs. I think Rabbi Penny Dunner has been publishing some of them, maybe online, and there's in English. I think he's working on it. But you can just what can you say about his memoirs, other than what you said kind of already?
Well, memoirs were very, very interesting, and I can't wait for Rabbi Dunner to actually publish them so I can read them myself to hear what all that Rav Ferber went through. He started writing them, and he traces it back all the way to his early years in Slobodka. It's a testimony of someone who was living through the fire in Slobodka, living through the division of the yeshivas of Beit Yitzchak where he learned, all the way taking him through the trials and tribulations. The community did not treat him well, and that was an understatement. And he went through a lot of tzaras. He had the reform movement he was working against, and he tells very upfront and very personal all that he went through on a very personal level. And he speaks about the halachic concepts that were behind his decisions, and he speaks about people who weren't following the path of Torah and how he handled them, and he speaks about the community trials and tribulations, and he speaks about Eretz Yisrael, his debate. There's a letter that Rav Charlap wrote to him encouraging him to make Aliyah and to move to Eretz Yisrael, and his debate about whether he should move or he shouldn't move. In the end, he took earth of Eretz Yisrael, and he had that with him, so that when he would be buried, he would have that earth with him. He speaks about when he was in Europe and Britain, when there was the bombings in between when he published Bamidbar until to Devarim, and he speaks about how the family would go to the bomb shelter, but he would stay in his base medrash and he would learn, he would protect him, and it's very personal. And unfortunately, it was lost to the family. When he passed away, then he gave as an inheritance to his daughter, which eventually was sold to a seller and made its way to America. And Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Penny Dunner was able to purchase them. And Bez Hashem, Rabbi Penny will put them out very soon, and we're looking forward to their publication and seeing them live, seeing them once they're published.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to link to what he has on his online. I can try to put the link in the show's notes with already what you linked. So already what you mentioned on Hebrew Books, I'll try to link to that as well. Now you mentioned this, but just to like in finality as a last question, really, what you published so far, the Haggadah, and if you want to talk about that, and what exactly was done to the new edition. So what did you do differently in that new edition? What are you doing to the Siddur? Any other plans on the new Seforim that you can tell the listeners?
So I think that the first person who has to be mentioned here is Jonathan Weingarten. Jonathan Weingarten was you could say a Talmud of Rav Ferber. Jonathan Weingarten is a tzaddik, he's a Talmud Chacham, and he's an ish asiyah, he's a person of action. And when Rav Ferber's Seforim went out of print after he passed away, we're talking 40 years ago now, then Jonathan Weingarten, who after he learned in Slobodka and Israel, and he went back to England, he was in university near where Rabbi Ferber lived. And he used to go once a week to hear Divrei Torah from Rav Ferber, together with a friend. And they would go into Rav Ferber's study, and he would share with them Divrei Torah, and afterwards they would write them up. Jonathan Weingarten actually sent me a typed up edition of all those Divrei Torah that he heard from Rav Ferber directly. And then years later, when Jonathan Weingarten wanted to purchase the Seforim, they were out of print. And then he himself took the project on himself with the permission of the family, and he started publishing the Seforim. And at that time, it was a copy reprint. and he photocopied them and he republished them, and he put in a lot of work because the print wasn't so clear, and he went over every letter with a black pen, black ink, to make sure they came out very clear before he published them. And it's really all on his merit that we have this farm today. Otherwise, they would be totally out of print. So all the credit goes to Jonathan Weingarten. And now, fast forward many years, when I met with him when I was in England, and he told me that Rabbi Jack Ferber, Eliezer Ferber, encouraged him to publish the Haggadah first. He said the Haggadah was always the most popular sefer, and he encouraged him to publish that first. When we were thinking of what to work on, then we also thought to do the Haggadah first, and being one of the most popular Seforim, and especially the Haggadah, Rav Ferber wrote it in 4 different places. He wrote it, and then he did a Miluim, and then afterwards he wrote another edition and another edition. So it was very scattered, and it was very hard to find. If you were looking for something specific on the Haggadah, it was all over the place. And also, the Haggadah didn't have an actual Haggadah. It was a debate whether to put the Haggadah in as well with it. Jonathan Weingarten's edition did have a Haggadah, but the original one didn't have. So when we did the Haggadah recently, this is again Hananya doing this, he found all the different sections where Rav Ferber speaks about the Haggadah, and he put them all in the right order, in order that they would be able to be one sefer from the beginning all the way to the end. And we published at the beginning of the sefer the actual Haggadah Shel Pesach itself, so it's easy to use. It's not a running commentary. It's all the Haggadah at the beginning and then all the commentary at the end. It's much easier to use on Seder night in that way. And we found an amazing editor, Rabbi Etiel Sofer, he's actually in Kolel Dayanus, but he took off a little bit of time for us, and he got involved in publishing the sefer. And there was simply flaws of how quickly it took and how professional it was. It was with the help of Yefenov. And then Corona came, the publishing, and it came back from the publishing. That was exactly that Purim. It came out just then when the Corona started, and that we were very worried that it wouldn't be sold. People were scared to go to the stores. But Baruch Hashem, a few hundred editions were sold, both in America and in Eretz Yisrael. The earlier editions of the Seforim are still available on layman's, and anyone who wants to purchase the Seforim themselves, not the new edition, but the original editions, they're able to get them layman's bookstore in England. And the current Haggadah Shel Pesach, if anyone's interested in getting that, that's at the email address of rabbiferber@gmail.com. So that's what we worked on the Haggadah Shel Pesach at this time round. There is another big kuntrus that he wrote, which is more iyunim, which we didn't put into this edition, but Hashem will be future editions. We'll be able to put those in as well. That was regarding the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And regarding the Siddur Rav Ferber wrote later in life. And a lot of it is references to different Seforim that he has. So it's a lot more work. It's finding all his references that he has to other Seforim and putting them all in. We have an amazing editor working on this, Rabbi Michal Kritzler from Bnei Brak, who was originally from England. He wrote he's writing the commentary on the Or Sameach. And he's an amazing work. So professional and so thorough. And Baruch Hashem was that he's taking off time now to publish that. And Be'ez Hashem, within a couple of months, it should be ready. We're very excited about it. I wasn't sure where we would get the funding from, but recently we had the schus of having a guest at my house, Rabbi Aryeh Stekler of Heichal HaTorah, if you know him. So I asked him, how do you do all the fundraising? So he said, you have to do an online platform. That's the only way. And I did an online platform to raise the funds for the Siddur now that we're doing. And it was going a little bit slowly. And then I got a call from someone who I didn't know who he was. And he said, where have you got to? And I told him where we got to. He said, I'll take the rest. And I said, thank you. Who are you? And he said he never knew Rav Ferber, but he sees this farm nearby him in the Makom where he davens in Shul. And he loves them. He takes them out every week. And he shares the Divrei Torah with his family. And he said, if they're reading Rav Ferber, he wants to have a part in it. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to continue and complete the Sefer. If there's anyone out there who's interested in helping us with future editions, then we got as far as we got. We helped for the future. I got another very interesting call from someone in Zurich who phoned me, and this was totally out of the blue. Antwerpen. And he said to me, I saw you redoing this farm, Haggadah Shel Pesach. I want you to know, I do a tikkun every year in my shul on Rav Ferber's yahrzeit, which was this week, Kaf Cheshvan, it was this week. And I said, a tikkun. I said, Rav Ferber wasn't a chassid. He said he was a chassid. He may have been from Lita, but he was a chassid. And I do a tikkun every year, and I quote his svarim in shul. And I said, thank you so much. Like, who are you? Where are you from? And he said that he actually, he never met Rav Ferber, but he's been a chassid of his. He considered himself a chassid of Rav Ferber, and he learns his svarim, and he quotes his svarim. And he also sent a little bit of a donation towards the svarim to help us with the siddur in memory of his mother, who passed away just at the beginning of COVID when the Haggadah just came out. And so we're zocher to have Baruch Hashem from all over the world people who are interested in the Seforim and supporting the Seforim. Also had support from a Talmud of Rav Ferber himself in America, someone who knew the Seforim and wanted to help us out. And so Baruch Hashem, from many, many angles, the Sefer is coming together. We feel a tremendous sense of bracha. Rav Ferber in his lifetime would send the Seforim. I don't know how he made these connections, but he would send the Seforim all over the world. He would send them to, and I have it. I actually have his ledger, his original ledger, which he writes every Sefer, who he sent to, if they paid or didn't pay, and how many he sent, all the way back and forth. And you read through it, and there's Ner Yisrael, Baltimore got copies, and Rav Pinchas Meir Hirschsprung, you see, gets copies, and Rabbi Dr. Nachum Drazen, who actually from Baltimore also, he's the one who donated the first edition of the Siddur. He's the one who sponsored it. And Eretz Yisrael, you have Rav Ari Levine, and you have Rav Harlap, and you see he was sending in Morocco and Chile and Mexico and Zurich, and I don't know how people heard him, but they were writing to him from all over the world that he was sending his Seforim. One place that really needs mentioning, which is just so interesting, is Jerba, Tunisia. I don't know what the connection is, but they had, you see in his ledger again and again and again, Tunisia. And when we published the Haggadah Shal Pesach, we got a letter from Rav Meir Mazuz, who's the rabbi of in Bnei Brak of Kisei Rachamim, who said that he saw we're doing the Haggadah Shal Pesach, and we should know that in Tunisia they would quote his Seforim, and the rabbi of Netivot, his Rebbe, the Nasi of the Yeshiva of Kisei Racham, would quote him constantly, and he encouraged us to print more Seforim, and he said we should add in something to another Sefer, one of his Chilukim. He said we should take that from this Sefer, put in that. So he had a Ha'ara where we should put certain things. So it's actually phenomenal where the support has been coming and the interest has been coming from all over. So together with Rastav pinching my shoulder, together with that, I also have all this positive feedback. And together with Hananya kind of encouraging me with his Zmirot that he puts out every week, there's been a tremendous amount of positive feedback, which is Baruch Hashem keeping us going from day to day.
Wow, really, really fascinating there. You have everyone, like you said, just reaching out and all that hashgacha. So if listeners want to get in touch with you, like you said already, I'll put it in the show notes again, Rabbi Ferber at gmail.com, and as well as they can try to find the new Haggadah. I'll try to find the links, like I said, to the Hebrew books, the Old Testament Hebrew books, what you said is available on Lehman's, and so and then the Siddur as well. You said that's coming out, and just in general, if anyone wants to hear more about him and to be in touch with you, to email you at rabbiferber@gmail. And
can I finish with one last story?
Go ahead.
This is a story I heard from my cousin, also a great grandson of Rav Ferber, Rabbi Shimon Gurovitz in London. He said that, I never heard this story before, but he said an amazing story that Rav Ferber was at a wedding. And he was invited because he was a distinguished rabbi, not that he didn't know the couple themselves. And as he came to sign the ketubah, the pen fell out of his hand. And he didn't know what that meant, what that symbolized. And Rav Ferber he wasn't one from scholars. He was very much Lita'in, from the Litiv yeshivas. And then he said, okay, he picked it up again, and he came to sign again, and it fell out of his hand again. And he said, if the pen fell out of my hand twice, there's something wrong with this ketubah, I'm not signing it. And he walked out. And the people say, no, Rabbi, please sign it, no. And he walked out. And they called him back. He didn't come, he refused to come. The wedding, I don't know if it was signed by someone else or what happened, but a couple of days later, they discovered that actually the color wasn't Jewish. The color wasn't Jewish. So there was some siyat d'shmaya that was guiding Rav Ferber throughout his life to be able to publish all of his Seforim, which in that small anecdote, you see like another measure of the tremendous siyat d'shmaya that Am Yisrael have throughout all the generations and all the eras, and we're seeing even in his personal life.
Wow. Okay. So, hopefully this, for the listeners, this is something enlightening, interesting. For me, it definitely was, and it is, and, people probably don't know of him and his Torah, so now they can find out a little bit more about him and his Torah. And with that, thank you very much for joining me to talk about Rav Ferber and his farm.
My pleasure. Thank you for the great schus. Have a great day.